You're listening to the Faith Breathed Hope podcast, episode number 183. Today, I speak with Army Combat Veteran, advocate for mental illness, and author of Bipolar General, My Forever War with Mental Illness, General Gregg Martin, on needing a support system for mental health. Podcast, where we gain inspiration and motivation from others who share their touching stories of renewing hope and discovering purpose in any circumstance. I'm your host, Christina Reisinger, and today we will be encouraged by another tremendously inspirational topic that will embolden you to release fear, begin taking small steps forward, and move into your God-given purpose to live and serve in this life. Join me for today's story. Hello and welcome back to Faith Breathed Hope. I am here with General Gregg Martin. How are you doing today?
I am doing just great, Christina. Truly blessed, having a wonderful day.
I'm so happy that you are, and I'm so glad that you're here with us on Faith Breathed Hope. The first thing that I have all of my guests do is share something with the audience about themselves that maybe not everybody in your circle knows about you. Something fun, something interesting, whatever you want to do.
Sure. Since we moved to Cocoa Beach 7 years ago, which was key to my recovery, being in the bright sun and the warmth, my favorite hobby and pastime is line dancing with a group of wonderful people. And we do it a few times a week. And it's so much fun. The music is great. The people are energizing. And it's really now my best friends are all dancers. So that's one thing. And the second thing is my favorite dessert is my wife's incredible carrot cake.
Oh, wow. Yay. I like both of those. I'm actually a dancer and we love carrot cake in our house too. How fun. So today we're actually here to speak about something a bit more serious than carrot cake. We're going to talk about mental health and how we need a support system. We need all the factors to come step in place to help us find that hope and that healing. Before we jump into our topic, General Martin, will you please share a little bit about your story so that the audience is clear on who you are and kind of what you've been through?
Sure. Born in Massachusetts, near Boston, back in 1956. And for my entire life, I had incredible energy, drive, enthusiasm, was a huge overachiever, like starting in high school, going through West Point, Army Ranger School, and then out in the Army as an officer and a leader of soldiers. And part of that condition, which I didn't understand until just a couple of years ago, is that I had a bipolar brain. I was living on the bipolar spectrum, meaning my brain was producing and distributing, large amounts of powerful natural chemicals such as dopamine and endorphins. And what these extra chemicals did is they produced in me this drive, energy, enthusiasm, problem-solving skills, creativity, optimism, positivity, extroversion. And what I didn't realize either was that it was continuing to increase little by little over the years and decades, went up, up, up. So that, by the time I was in my 20s, for example, after having been, big overachiever, like in high school, captain of the teams, honor roll, et cetera, West Point, graduated near the top of the class. Out in the Army, I started running marathons. And so I didn't just run a marathon. I ran 7 of them under 3 hours, including a 2:36. Now, that's really some intense, fast, long distance running, but it was reflective of that hyperthymic personality. When the Army then said, "Hey, Greg, we want to send you to graduate school at MIT, and your mission is to get 1 master's in engineering," I came out of there with 2 masters, a PhD, and I finished the Army graduate school course by correspondence. And so I say that because I had a bipolar brain, and this was clear evidence. That type of achievement in such a short amount of time was not normal. And I continued to progress, do very, very well, and I was doing everything at home, coaching Little League, teaching Sunday school, being a scoutmaster, all that kind of stuff, until things really took a change when I went to the war in Iraq. I was in 2003, was a brigade commander in charge of about 10,000 troops. And the intense pressure and thrill and euphoria of leading soldiers in battle triggered my genetic predisposition for bipolar disorder. And so I went into mania. And it was a high performing mania that helped me perform way better. It boosted me. I felt like Superman. I didn't need to sleep. I had unbelievable energy. My mind was so sharp. I could solve, these really complicated, unanticipated problems under fire in near instantaneously. And so I stayed in mania for about the year. And then when we went back to Germany on redeployment, I fell into depression. And so that was my first up, down bipolar cycle. And when I went to the doctor, and this happened 3 times in the next few years, and said, "Hey, doc, I'm depressed. There's something wrong with me. I'm usually high energy, high interest, hyper focused. Now I'm not interested. I'm withdrawn. I'm indecisive. I'm confused. I think there's something wrong." And 3 times the doctor said, "You're fine. There's nothing wrong." And 3 times they were wrong. And so this bipolar condition went unknown, undetected, unrecognized, undiagnosed for 12 years, until by the time I hit 2014, 11 years after Iraq, I went into what they call full-blown mania, where my mind turned into a raging bonfire of insanity and madness. And I was completely out of control, over the top, just really mad, insane. And I can give you examples of that, if you're interested. And I was basically, my boss, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest ranking officer in the country. He did an assessment and an investigation, and he looked at it and he said, "Well, we need to do something about this." So on a Friday afternoon in mid-July 2014, I got a call, "Report to the chairman's office, 10 o'clock Monday morning." And so I did. And I didn't know if I was going to get promoted, fired, extended in command. But as soon as I went into the chairman's office, I saw the lawyer. And I said, "Uh-oh, not going to be a good day. No promotion today." And the chairman, though, who I'd known for years, he came across the room and he gave me a big hug. And he said, "Gregg, I love you like a brother. You've done an amazing job. I give you a grade of A+. But your time at National Defense University as president is over. You have until 5 p.m. today to resign voluntarily, or I will fire you. And I'm giving you an order to get a psychiatric exam this week at Walter Reed." Well, Christina, do you think I was disappointed and, maybe dejected about basically being fired by the top officer in the land, being ordered to get a psych eval? No. I said, "Thank you, Chairman," and gave him a big hug. And I said, "God put me in this position to do great things. And now he's going to put me somewhere else to do even bigger things." And paradoxically, 9 years later, I think I was right, because my bipolar mission and writing the book and all the speaking, I think is the most important work I've ever done. So I think God really did have an amazing plan that took a while to unfold. But so basically, I resigned that day. With bipolar disorder, what goes up must come down. And so I was at this peak mania, and then I crashed into terrible depression and psychosis, which is hallucinations, seeing and hearing things, and delusions, believing things to be true that are not true. And so within about 4 months, I was in such bad shape, I clawed my way back into the hospital and saw the same doctors who, that month in July 2014, they gave me 3 times they evaluated me as fit for duty, nothing wrong, you're perfectly healthy. And the first time they did it, they sent that up to the Pentagon, and the Pentagon said, "We don't believe it. Do another exam." And so they did a second exam, same thing, fit for duty, perfectly healthy. And the Pentagon said, "Do a third one." And so they did 3 exams, and they misdiagnosed me all 3 times, where I was in a raging state of mania, insane, out of my mind, and they diagnosed me as being fine. So, but by November, I had fallen into horrible, deathly, crippling, hopeless depression. and terrifying, frightening psychosis of my own death. And then they were finally able to diagnose me correctly with bipolar disorder type 1 with psychosis. And at that point, I had the diagnosis for which I was really grateful because now we had a label. We could begin to go after this disease and begin to recover from it. But I went from bad to worse. And I went into 2 years of bipolar hell, frightening delusions of my own death that people were spying on me, were going to get me arrested, put in jail, beaten, stabbed to death, and die gurgling in a pool of my own blood. Then another one that this invisible force would grab me and throw me underneath a rapidly moving 18-wheeler truck, ripping me apart. And then every morning, a boa constrictor snake, I would hallucinate seeing it come up out of the woods, wrap itself around me and crush the life out of me. So I had no energy, was incapacitated. And all I wanted to do was die. I thought my wife and family would be better off without me. And I basically said, that's it. I just, God, please take me. There's no purpose in living. I'm never going to get better. I'm never going to recover. And at that point, my wife and a friend, an Army friend, helped me get into a very, very good VA hospital up in New England. And I went there 2 weeks inpatient and then 4 more weeks where I was living in the hospital in a dorm room, undergoing all kinds of therapies and treatment, including electric shock therapy of my brain. And the inpatient didn't heal me or cause me to recover, but I stopped getting worse, which was huge. And then, my depression and psychosis continued. And my wife insisted with my doctor that he try some new medication. So they did. They tried lithium, which is a natural salt harvested from the earth. And Christina, within days, it was unbelievable, days, my depression vanished. My psychosis vanished after 2 years of bipolar hell. And I began to feel like my old self pre-bipolar disorder. And then we made a decision to move to Florida for the brightness, the warmth, the sunshine. We moved here 7 years ago, and I've been on a pretty solid journey of recovery for the last 7 years. And I call it a journey of recovery because it's a forever war. You're never healed. Bipolar disorder never goes away. I suppose God could heal you if he wanted and touched your head or something. But for, 99.99999% of people, it's a lifetime chronic disease of the brain. And so, and then I've been on my recovery journey ever since. And I can talk about that if you'd like. But to get me to that point where I was recovering, it really took a team, took a village, took, my wife, my family, my good friends, the incredible medical professionals that I had, the good fortune to work with at the VA, and God, the almighty, powerful king of the universe, really overwatching this whole thing and making sure that I didn't die by suicide or some other means, and that he basically brought me up out of bipolar hell and launched me on a journey of recovery. And, I've been hanging on to God ever since as I kind of climb the mountain day in and day out.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you first for sharing all of that. I know that you probably have had some practice, but I'm sure at some point it was a little bit of vulnerability to be able to share that. So there's so many things that come up. Like there are a lot of things I want to ask you, but I want to kind of stay on topic here because we did say that we're going to discuss how we need people in this. One of the things though that you did mention made me start thinking. You said something about how God wanted you to do big things, both in the Army and then when you were asked to leave, asked to be medically looked at. You said that he had big things for you elsewhere later on down the road. I think you said 9 years down the road. And I want to touch on that because that is so significant that I believe that the Lord sometimes allows us to go through these really, really tough times in our lives so that we can later accomplish his will, the things that everybody always wants to understand their purpose. And so, oh, well, if I understand my purpose, then everything will go well and I can just do whatever God wants me to do and life will be great. And I don't find that to be true. And it sounds like you don't find that to be true either. Oh, in order to help other people, we have to experience life. And so it sounds like you experienced a lot of life, that you were able to have been blessed with that mania. And I forgive me if I'm, stepping on your toes here, but it sounds like it was a good thing at first because you were able to have high accomplishments and achievements in the military. But then it was time to go a different route. And then it was time to help other people who suffer with these things. And a lot of times I don't think that we notice that the things we're going through are, I don't want to say normal, but the fact that we're not alone, other people go through them. And the fact that you're sharing that you're going through all these things, that you had these high achievements, that you had all this great energy and you were, getting all these things accomplished. I think it is good to share with people because to me, when you were speaking about that, I'm like, oh, that's a type A personality. I'm type A. I do all these things and I know a lot of other people that are high achievers. And so, but I guess this was to the extreme. Um, why do you think that God wants us to? I know He wants us to experience things, but why do you think that He wants us to experience Him to the extent that we do, to that place where you said it was so dark and you didn't want to live and you thought that it would be better off if you weren't here in order just to help other people? Did you ever struggle with wondering why you had to go through all of that?
Yes, I did. I did wonder. I did struggle with why I had to go through all that during that period from the fall of 2014 to the fall of 2016. So, from the time I fell into that severe, crippling, hopeless depression with terrifying psychosis, a couple months after I'd been fired, until that I came out of the bipolar pit with lithium. Um, yeah, I that was a rough 2 years where I mean I really wanted to die, and I didn't. I was blessed that I didn't have the urge to take my own life. I never had what they call a active suicidal ideation. I had passive ideations, which means I wanted to die, but I wanted somebody else to kill me, as opposed to an active ideation where you want to die and you want to kill yourself. Now, the problem, the reason they hospitalized me is that is a very dangerous condition to be in because a passive ideation can quickly transform into an active ideation and then a plan and then carrying it out. And so I was lucky that didn't happen. So yeah, I was angry at God. I was mad. I was in a place of real darkness and blackness and lack of hope. Never thought I'd get better. But going back to the beginning, you ask, well, why does God allow or give people certain diseases at birth? And like for me, I was born with a bipolar gene at birth. It didn't manifest itself and become known and open for decades later. But one of the things about being on the bipolar spectrum, starting low and then working your way up, is that many of our most talented, inventive, artistic, genius, creative people on the planet in history have been people who have lived with bipolar disorder. And it's typically because of the manic phases where their brain is flooded with these powerful chemicals like dopamine and they're on overdrive and they can see and experience the world differently than others. And that, like Vincent van Gogh, is a prime example. I mean, probably one of the greatest painters, if not the best ever. Many, many others, military leaders, Winston Churchill, for example, bipolar disorder. And he was a great leader for Great Britain during World War II. Ted Turner, the founder of CNN, bipolar disorder. We think Teddy Roosevelt, president, bipolar disorder. Many think George Patton was bipolar, the great World War II commander. And so by allowing people to have this brain disease that does unusual things and carries people to heights and abilities that they otherwise would never go. I mean, God really elevates the human race. He elevates the level of achievement and accomplishment in the human race. And that's a good thing. Now, the bad side is with bipolar disorder, what goes up must come down. And so then you go from the height of mania into the depths of depression, which leads frequently to suicide, all kinds of bad things. And that's really, really rough. And so, but the good news is that today, with medicine, medical capability and understanding being what it is, the medical profession pretty much understands bipolar disorder, has many, many ways to treat it effectively. And so that if a person goes in, gets help, gets diagnosed properly, and then gets a good treatment plan and sticks with it, the chances are they can live a happy, healthy, purposeful life. And on the other hand, if they don't go get help and they don't get diagnosed and treated, a disease like bipolar disease will destroy a person. It'll ruin a person's marriage, their family, their career, their finances, leads to addictions, homelessness, prison, violent death. Death, like I was very fortunate. Many doctors have told me that I didn't die by heart attack or stroke when I was in really bad shape. And or many people die by suicide. A person with bipolar disorder is 40 times more likely to die by suicide than someone who does not have bipolar disorder. Think about that. So I think God allows things in order to elevate the human race and to elevate the spirit of the human race. And then, unfortunately, the downside of the illness is that you crash to really low, deadly, terrifying places. And again, it takes a village, including medical professionals, to lift you back out of that pit.
Yes, I agree. I want to actually I want to talk about that in just a second. I just had a curiosity question. You said that sometimes people with bipolar are more likely to die of heart attack and stroke. Is that due to the mania making your heart? I mean, just curious of like why that would happen.
It happens because when you go into mania, your brain produces and distributes and floods your brain with, you know, enormous amounts of these very powerful chemicals that raise your energy level, that mean you don't have to sleep, where you're going 1,000 miles an hour, full of ideas, rushing around here, there, everywhere, physically, mentally, emotionally, just out of control. And that pace puts the organs of the body at enormous risk and under incredible stress. And so my brain was under enormous stress with all that going on, as was my heart and probably some other internal organs. But the doctors mention heart and brain in particular.
Mm-hmm. Right. I can imagine that it elevates your heart rate when you're have all that energy, that excess energy. And then so the question that I wanted to get back to, there's a couple of questions. Earlier on, you said that you were inpatient. I understand that when you're an inpatient, it's almost a safe place for you when you transition. And I mean you as in you in general, when people transition out of inpatient back into the real world, that can be daunting, and it can be kind of difficult, especially if you go back to people and things, that surroundings and people that don't understand exactly what's going on, and they don't know how to support you. First of all, I wanted to ask you if you wanted to share how your transition was, and then if you will touch on how important it is to have those people in place that understand what you're going through so that they can support you when you come home.
Sure. So I'll start with the beginning of going into inpatient care. Christina, I was so happy to be going into inpatient. I was just thrilled because I knew that I was going to be taken care of and I would begin to get better, which I had been hopeless that would ever happen. So during the 2 weeks of inpatient care, It was a multidisciplinary team of psychiatrists, psychologists, nurses, pharmacologists, chaplain, who was wonderful. And it was this multidisciplinary team. And they raised my spirits because they were so professional and caring and compassionate. And they listened to me and they answered my questions and we worked together as a team. And it was so good that I actually began to go from depression back into mania, which is quite a phenomenon. And on weekends, though, when the team was gone and there were only a couple nurses in the facility, I would sink back to depression, which was really worried the doctors. And so the 2 weeks was very positive. And then when I was released from the locked inpatient ward, they said, we'd like to keep you in the hospital for follow-on treatment, and we'll let you stay in a dormitory room outside of the locked facility. So I did. I loved it. It was really great. I had total freedom. I was seeing all these doctors and therapists who I loved and were great. And I was seeing the chaplain about every other day. And, we were praying and, going through the word. It was wonderful. But at the end of those 6 weeks, when it was time to go, I was afraid. I was scared because I was leaving this little cocoon of goodness and love and compassion where I had made all these wonderful friends and colleagues. And so I drove home because my wife had made sure I had a car there. I drove home and it was about an hour and a half drive. And we lived in the country in New Hampshire. And as I got further away from the VA hospital, I started to sink into depression. And as I got closer to our house in New Hampshire, where it was my wife, our dog, and my mother who was living there, I started sinking into depression. And it was terrible how then I went right back into the same intractable depression with psychosis all over again. And, so I think my wife really understood because we've got two sons who have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So she really understands what this condition is all about. And so she was supportive, loving, compassionate. She didn't blame me like, hey, you're not trying hard enough, or you lack willpower, or you lack character, just suck it up and get better. She didn't do any of that stuff, which was very, very helpful. My mom, who was a wonderful lady, World War II generation, I mean, they didn't believe in mental illness back in those days. It was just, okay, mental illness, get over it, suck it up,
Yeah.
drive on, get better. And so she was trying to be helpful in her drill sergeant like approach to this condition. And that probably wasn't helpful. But I did have friends who were Army friends who lived in the area who were accepting, they were non-judgmental, they didn't criticize me, they would invite me to do things. Like I went out on boats a few times, which was kind of fun. I wouldn't have done it on my own. One guy made homebrew beer and had these really good cigars from Central America. And, it was kind of a form of self medication, but I'd go over to his house and we'd drink beer and smoke fancy cigars. And it was a temporary pleasure, excuse me, but it made me feel better. So I think that team, what you talked about, that village of people who were accepting, and my four sisters were all accepting and kind, my kids, same way. I think that played a big role in helping me to not get worse.
All right. It's so important to have a support system when we talk about grief. Everybody who has listened to the show knows that it started off about grief. And when I first started doing that, it was very important for people to understand that you should have a support system. Now, sometimes when you're going through tough times, it's very difficult to ask for help. And then the other side of that is it's very difficult to accept help. Now, there's a whole other side of the spectrum where people don't know how to support you. They don't understand what you're going through because they haven't experienced that. Can you talk a little bit first about what kind of things are helpful? What things do you need? Is it something like we're in grief where I say, hey, you don't always have to say something. You could just come and sit down beside me and listen, or maybe not listen. Maybe we don't talk. Maybe, like you said, you enjoyed a beer and a cigar. Maybe we enjoy a movie or something. I remember when my daughter first died, one of the nurses called me up and she took me to one of those painting classes and out to dinner and just to get me out of the house. So, what are some things that people out there that want to support their loved ones, their friends that are suffering with things like bipolar disorder, that they can do to step up and support you or anybody that they know?
Well, the place where you really need the help in bipolar disorder is when you're in a state of depression and you
Mm.
have no interest, no energy, want to be alone, you don't want to do anything. And so that's the place. When you're in mania, you feel like Superman, you feel like $1,000,000. You're, running around with endless energy. But so when you're in depression, I think what people, whether it's wife, family, friends, other, is to be there as a friend. They don't even have to say anything, just being with you, coming over to the house, hanging out, um, offering a meal is really nice. A nice meal is something that's always appreciated. Um, Offering to do activities. Like I said, I had a couple friends with boats and there was a big lake. And so they would take me out, offer to take me out on the boat. Now, a lot of times I didn't want to go on the boat. I was so depressed. I didn't want to put winter clothes on or different clothes on. I didn't want to leave the house. It was just too much. And so when I would say, hey, I really appreciate it, but no thanks, they were fine. They didn't push it on me. They weren't pushy. In the wintertime, I used to be an avid skier, but I lost all my interest in skiing. And when they'd say, hey, come on, you love skiing, let's go skiing. Come on, get your stuff on. Oh, let's go. That would repel me because I didn't want to go because I was depressed and I didn't have the energy or the interest or the drive to get all dressed up in winter clothes and go over the ski slope. Um, but I did have times when people they caught me at the right time and they said, hey, what do you think about maybe going skiing? It might feel really good, the cold air, it might be really nice. We can go together, can have some hot chocolate at the lodge. And so a couple times I went and I had an okay time. And so those are some examples. Something that my wife started to do that was really good. This was a very tough ordeal for her to see me, kind of her Superman husband, devolve into such a wreck. And so she loved to watch movies and, some of these series, like we watched The Americans, which is fantastic, House of Cards, Breaking Bad, these series that were really, really intricate, kept you on the edge of your seat. You could easily binge and watch multiple shows in a row. So we would just put it on, just kind of relax on the couch, take a blanket, put it over us, and just sit there and didn't talk, didn't do anything, just watch the series or the movie. And it was very, very enjoyable and comforting, even though it was just a temporary pleasure. It was really, really nice and made me feel better and forget about my depression for a little while. So those are just a few things.
Yeah. Um, so then I want to talk also about the person who is actually suffering from the bipolar disorder. You mentioned that you get into the depression and you just really don't want to do anything. Now, there's something where I come from where you talk about acting opposite. Hey, you don't want to do this, but you do it anyways because you know it's good for you. And it may pull you out. Maybe you don't want to go outside your house, but you know that the sun is good for you. You know that vitamin D is healthy. And so you go stand out there. And before too long, after you've done this, you know that you start to feel better. Can you give some encouragement to those out there that do suffer with the bipolar, or maybe they've not even been diagnosed, but they say, hey, listen, I'm hearing you. And this is something that maybe I'm struggling with. Maybe I ought to look into. what is something that they can do when they get into this place of depression and they just don't want to ask for help? They don't want to accept the help. Their insides tell them that they need to stay where they're at. They need to push people away. How can they act, and what can they do to be able to forward their own hope, or their own progress rather?
Well, that first technique that you pointed out, I think is a really powerful one. And I think having the person with the depression, having an intelligent, logical conversation with their spouse, a family member, a friend, to talk about the need to, as you said, do the opposite, um, and just talk about it so that it's in your brain. And then when the time comes to act on it, you can say, hey, the partner can say, hey, let's do the opposite. You want to stay inside where it's dark and you're depressed. Let's go outside into the sunshine. That vitamin A would be really good for you. Or, I know you just want to lay on the couch and stare into space and ruminate and, not do anything because you're so depressed, but let's go for a walk. It doesn't have to be that far. It doesn't have to be that long, but let's do it. It'll be good for you. It'll help you to get better little by little, and it'll make you a little bit happier. And so I think just these incremental, little by little, asking, hey, come on, let's do this. This would be good for you. I think that could have a very positive effect. And it may not work every time. Like you may get out into the sun twice, and then maybe three times the answer is going to be, no, I don't want to go out there. Or you may go walking three times, and then, four times they may not walk. But you still achieve something by just doing the little bit. My mother was very good about taking me with her to church, even though my faith was pretty black, and I was not happy with God. I was angry at my condition. I had a vision for Gregg Martin's life after the Army that I thought was the right vision. And, God, why did you let this get all screwed up? Well, God let happen what it did to achieve his own purposes, which I'm now carrying out. And so my mom was very, very good about persistently inviting me to go with her to church. Even when my wife had kind of stopped going to church because she had kind of a crisis of faith. And my mom was good. She'd be like, come on, let's go to church. It'll be good. You like church. It'll be a good thing. It'll be positive. You can pray to God and, that you'll get better. and so I think that's all really good stuff. I would also say that when someone is in a state of depression, when someone who has bipolar disorder, when they're in a state of mania, they are going to be the last person to say, I need help. There's something wrong with me, because they feel so great. They feel wonderful. It's like the best high ever in the world. And so that's not when they're going to turn to help. Now, other people are going to see their crazy, bizarre behavior and say, hey, you need help. Let's get you in to see a doctor. But when someone is in depression, then, like with me, then I knew there was something wrong with me. I knew I needed help. And I went three different times, well, four, in a state of depression. And the fourth time, they diagnosed me correctly with bipolar disorder. So I think someone in depression, that's a good chance, if they haven't been properly diagnosed, to get them in to see a doctor, and to bring family members and friends to the doctor's appointment, so that the doctor can get a more complete vision of the person's condition. They call that collateral information in the psychiatry world. And so you want the doctor to get as much info as he or she can. And then that's often when things are diagnosed, when they're in a state of depression. And it's really important for someone with bipolar disorder to make sure the doctor knows, hey, I'm not always depressed. I used to be really high as a kite with mania, because that then will help them connect the dots as to what the condition really is. Because treating someone with just depression is way different than treating someone with bipolar disorder. Totally different medications and everything. So did that help answer it at all?
Yes, yes. And I just want to also touch base on the fact that we need a community. Now, I know that people are very private Sometimes people are nowadays, anyways, they'll throw anything out there, especially on social media. But when we can have, if we have a community and we're vulnerable enough to say, hey guys, I am struggling. And like you said, that we've sought medical treatment so that we know what's going on. We can understand better what's going on with what, our behaviors and the things that we're experiencing. But then you can turn around and you can say, hey, this is not something that, is exciting for me. I'm struggling with it and I need prayer. And we can have a community of people that come together. I had to do that a couple of times. Once was when our daughter was sick, and ended up reaching out to as many people as I could think of, not because, I wanted to talk to that person in particular. I had to put my pride aside and say, hey, it takes a village, it takes a community. We want to all lift, her up. And then another time with my other daughter when she was injured. And so, that can be very difficult for people, I think, where they say, hey, I don't want people to know my business. They might think ill of me. They may think that I'm weak. I'd like for you to address that, maybe give some encouragement to people on that issue to allow themselves to be vulnerable. And then I have one final question for you.
Okay. So there's a big stigma today, continues to be around mental health, mental illness, brain illness. And the stigma is based on ignorance and lack of knowledge. And the lack of knowledge is that people get mental illness because they lack character, they lack willpower, they're bad people, they're not trying hard enough. And we know that's not true. It's just completely untrue. Um, Mental illness is just as biologically and physically real as diabetes, heart disease, cancer. And there's no stigma against those people. And so people routinely come out and say, hey, I just want you to know, to family, friends, and others, look, I've been diagnosed, I have cancer. I have breast cancer, I have brain cancer. Would you pray for me? I'd really appreciate any help. And same with other physical, quote unquote, physical diseases. And so that's a natural thing to do when you have physical diseases. Like I'm going to get a hip replacement next month. And so, I've told everybody, hey, I'm getting a hip replacement. My hip's worn out. I have arthritis in my hip. I need a new titanium hip. And nobody thinks anything of that. But
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to mental or brain conditions, people think, ooh, that's different. That's spooky. I'm going to hide it. I'm embarrassed. I'm ashamed. I'm not going to talk about it. What I would say is don't look at it that way. Look at it and say, I have a brain condition that's just as physically real as diabetes, cancer, heart disease, arthritis in the hip. And I'm not ashamed. I'm not going to be ashamed. I'm not going to be embarrassed. I'm going to tell it like it is. I'm going to be honest and open and transparent with family, friends, and others so that they know and they can aware, and I can help educate them as to what the reality is. And I think that's one of the great things that, the Lord is using me for, is he's got this guy who was, kind of like Superman in the Army, Ranger School, MIT, all these marathons and all this stuff. And then, I basically, the bipolar helped elevate me until it went too high. Then it went too low. Then I basically got fired, retired, and hospitalized. But now God has lifted me back up and given me a position where it's, General Martin, Army Airborne Ranger. This guy has got some credibility to talk about this stuff. And so I think it's lifting and helping and advancing the whole community of, hundreds and hundreds of millions of people in the US alone, with this whole idea of mental health, mental illness. So my thing is, and not everybody needs to or wants to copy me, but I'm totally transparent. I mean, I wrote a book about it. So I've got a book that lays out the details and the depth and everything about my mental illness. I've published about 25 articles. I've probably given 100 talks and interviews. And, I talk all the time about this. And I think I'm helping other people And by sharing my bipolar story, I'm helping stop the stigma, promote recovery, and save lives, which, by the way, that is my life mission, what I just said. And so that's what I'm doing. So I would encourage others to, join me, be part of the team, be part of the team Martin, the bipolar general.
That's amazing. I'm glad that you're doing that. And the last thing that I did want, you've already kind of touched on it, was I wanted to talk about in my space, we journal. I encourage people to journal and to write. You just shared that you wrote your book about this. Can you speak to how, not only was the writing something that you can promote to other people to help them heal, but was it therapeutic for you to actually get it all in words?
Yes, it was very therapeutic, Christina. In fact, the reason that I first started to write it was really for me. I said, I need to tell my story. I want to write this all down because God has given me and allowed me to live through this incredibly difficult experience, this crucible of bipolar disorder. And I want to write it all down before I forget it. I want it to be there in writing. And so it was therapeutic and cathartic for me, my own brain, my own soul, my own spirit. And then as I wrote it, and it started to take form, and I let other people in my family, my sons, my wife, and some good friends read it. Then the feedback was positive. People are like, wow, this is so good. You should publish this. This could be a book. It could really help people. And then I started looking at it as more of an external product. And so I still had the satisfaction of all the catharsis and therapeutic value and all that good stuff. But then it kind of started changing to, wow, I really think this could be a book. And of course, that then took on a whole nother process to find a publisher, to get it published and all that. But yeah, it was, Christina, it was incredibly helpful and therapeutic. And I'm really grateful that I got to do it. And I wouldn't have been able to get through it all. And it wouldn't be as good as it is were it not for, the Lord guiding me, helping me, giving me strength and persistence. Because it took a lot of persistence to keep going.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that he's working through you to reach other people. For me, it was a little bit of the opposite. I thought I was going to help people because that must be the reason that God allowed whatever, especially when my daughter died. It must be the reason, he allowed that to happen. I was supposed to help someone. In fact, somebody told me that just after she died, which was not helpful, that maybe I was supposed to help other mothers. And, in time that came to be. But it's very difficult to think that you have to go through a lot of things to be able to help other people. You're like, why can't I just do it a different way? Why can't it be a
Right.
lot easier than this? But I do encourage people to write things down. And I'm so glad that you wrote your stuff down and your story down so that other people can read it and understand that they're not alone as well. Can you share with the audience where they can find you or they can find the book as well?
Sure. The, uh, the book is called Bipolar General, which is me, my forever war with mental illness, because my war is never going to end. I always have to manage and contain and keep the bipolar monster at bay. And the best place to find it is to go to my website, which is www.bipolargeneral.com. And when you end up on the landing page of the website, there's a good link to Amazon, which you can order it through them, but they keep running out. They run out of books about every 1 or 2 weeks. They're out, and they say, "Hey, it's going to take us 3 weeks to get more books." And by the way, they've actually given it a #1 bestseller rating. And
Yeah.
so anyway, so Amazon's a good choice. #2 is Barnes and Nobles. Barnes and Noble, they have they're a good reputable bookstore. And then third choice, if you want, is the U.S. Naval Institute Press, who were my publisher, and they sell the books as well.
Yep.
But so you've got three choices. And if I would really encourage you to read the book, if you liked our conversation today, if you want to learn about mental illness, just read this book. It's the people who have read it have said it's riveting. couldn't put it down. They learned so much. It's already being used in medical schools to teach psychiatry, which is really remarkable. And I've been asked to give more than a dozen talks to med schools and hospitals, Fortune 500 companies, military commands, veterans groups, et cetera, to talk about the book and about my life. So hopefully you'll get a hold of it and enjoy it and learn something. And it really, the book will save lives. And if not your own, it could be someone that you love.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, and go get the book so that you can share it with somebody else and read it for yourself as well. So thank you so much, General Martin. I really have enjoyed this conversation and look to you in awe of what you're doing to help others. Thank you.
Thanks, Christina. I really appreciate it. This interview was great. You're awesome, and you're doing a great job.
Thank you. And for all of you out there, continue to be blessed and bless others, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. And I want to thank you for joining us on Faith Breathed Hope, where you gain inspiration and motivation to renew hope and discover purpose in any circumstance. Please like and share this podcast and give us a review on iTunes. Be blessed.